Hey, good morning, everybody. Today I'm going to be reacting to a Fox News story about the State Department briefing after Russia hit with sanctions. And here we go.
So that was Antony Blinken, Biden's Secretary of State, and the Ukrainian Foreign Minister together there at the State Department. Talking about sanctions, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister thanked the Americans profusely for our full diplomatic, economic, and military support of their country, and kind of hinted that there isn't full unity within Europe. The Foreign Minister said, it's one thing to condemn, but action has to follow a condemnation. So there is some splits that are occurring between the European powers. Pete Hegseth, your reaction to what we saw there at the State Department and what you heard from President Biden this afternoon?
Yeah, a lot of words, a lot of talk about agreements, sanctions. What I saw in that briefing room was impotence and resignation. Two people resigned to whatever Vladimir Putin is deciding to do. And Antony Blinken talked about laying out the playbook. What have we done? We've laid out the playbook at every step of what Vladimir Putin has done. Except it doesn't feel like we've done it either as a ref or a coach or even a player. More like an observer outside of what's happening there. Totally resigned because the leverage we once had, which is ultimately energy. Yeah. Russia supplies 10% of the world's oil, a third of Europe's oil, 60% of Germany's oil. Back to Ronald Reagan, we were trying to stop pipe.
I didn't know Russia supplied 10% of the world's oil. That's a lot of oil.
Lines from the USSR to Europe. We didn't stop it. Donald Trump wanted to stop it, so they did have that leverage. They do have those opportunities. And so we're just an observer at this point. And we were talking, Dana, as we were watching, where's the pound the table moment of we will not allow this to happen? This is a challenge between what Vladimir Putin wants to do and Xi Jinping in China, a new alliance that they have, a world that they want to replace. And they want to undo what was a naive Western foreign policy consensus for quite some time, that if you liberalize and you open up to China or to Russia and allow them to provide your energy, democracy and freedom and other benefits will flow from that. Instead, autocrats like Xi Jinping in China and Vladimir Putin in Russia have enriched themselves in the hope of making Russia great again. And we're kind of on the sidelines saying, we'll do what we can, we'll ratchet up the sanctions. Do you think Vladimir Putin is concerned at this moment about a single sheet of paper or a single sanction that we've talked about so far? And that's why it all felt very impotent.
And the American people are concerned about the price of gas. The president mentioned that. He said, there's going to be costs jammed up onto Russia, but those costs are also going to hit the American driver. Dana, listen to this.
Defending freedom will have cost for us as well, and here at home. We need to be honest about that. But as we do this, I'm going to take robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy, not ours.
Well, I don't believe that at all. But do you think he explained why we're going to be paying these costs?
Well, a couple of things on this. I think that energy is the biggest story out of this, and it's just the backbone of every economy. And for so many years, we've been talking mostly about climate change and figuring out a way to get to electric vehicles. Great goal, but you can't change the law of physics, and fossil fuels are so important to economies, and now we're seeing that play out. Russia is actually probably over-dependent on oil and gas for its economy, but we are under-dependent, and Europe is a disaster. And they've been told since the Reagan administration, don't make yourselves dependent. Now,
what did John McCain call Russia, a gas station with nukes?
Yeah, but President Biden today is talking about that gas prices could go up. But let's be clear, they were already up. Okay, so we've had supply chain issues, but also there were policy decisions made by President Biden on his first day in office, amongst other things, where they're canceling oil and gas leases that make us more vulnerable to these kinds of things. And so energy is the most important thing. This is the price that countries pay when they give up energy independence. And we're seeing that play out on the world stage. A couple of things that Blinken said that might be not a pound the table moment, but what the last thing he said was, if Putin decides to escalate, so will we. Okay, but then what does that mean? Because if Putin doesn't care about sanctions, then what is the next step? Will we provide aid to any sort of insurgency? I will also point out that the foreign minister of Ukraine made it clear that the minor incursion point that President Biden made at his press conference a couple of months ago was not helpful in any way, because that has also made Europe a little bit less stable. Last thing is, something, it's just an instinct. I'm not saying I know President Putin. I had a chance to be in the room with him several times. He looks different to me. Like this, it feels like something has changed even with the pandemic. I don't know exactly what it is, but I was just reminded that President Macron of France, when he met with him, he said something in Putin has changed. Like something, like maybe something up here, maybe something in his gut instinct, but that is kind of what we're dealing with, is a change in his strategic direction.
And President Biden has said that he is going to whip Putin's butt. Martha, he's been saying it for years. He's got his number, that Putin respects him. Here's just number 3, a flashback saying, you know, there was no way Biden was ever going to back down to the guy. Listen.
Putin knows if I am president of the United States, his days of tyranny and trying to intimidate the United States and those
Biden's trying to act like a tough
are
guy.
over. I'm going to stand up to him.
Okay, has he stood up to him?
Well, we'll see how that works out. It doesn't seem like Vladimir Putin is too concerned about that comment. And I just want to touch on what Dana was just saying, because earlier General Kellogg was talking about this. He said, this is not the man, meaning Putin, who I had several interactions with during the Trump administration. Something has changed in him. And when you watch, I thought a really interesting exchange between Putin and his spy chief, when the spy chief stood up basically and said, you know, yes, I support what we're doing. And he was very flustered. And Putin said, what do you mean you support what we're doing? He said, I support, you know, the entry of Luhansk and Donetsk into the Russian Federation. And he said, that's not what we're doing. They're independent. We're declaring their independence. Like, you're on the wrong page. And it just reminds me of the kind of scene that we've seen with prior dictators.
Like a mobster.
When they start, yes, when they start to kind of lose it a little bit. And he's got all these anniversaries, the 100th anniversary tomorrow of the founding of the Soviet Union. He has said that was the saddest day of Russian history. And he wants to put this empire back together. He's, you know, 73 years old. How many more years does he have to really do this? And he senses that this is his moment. So there's a danger in the air with Putin. And that is a very difficult thing to solve with, you know, Minsk and Normandy agreements and papers.
Yeah.
Because I think he hears that and goes, whatever, throw your papers up in the air. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, we can only do so much if this guy wants to do what he wants to do, and he's got the backing of the Russian military the way he has it. Let's listen to a little bit of the president earlier, Harold Ford Jr., and we just kind of get a sense of his tone.
This is the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? We still believe that Russia is poised to go much further in launching a massive military attack against Ukraine. Hope I'm wrong about that. Hope we're wrong about that. But Russia has only escalated its threat against the rest of Ukrainian territory. Russia's moved supplies of blood and medical equipment into position on their border. You don't need blood unless you plan on starting a war.
So that's a major piece of intelligence that the United States has, to see that they're moving blood. I can't see why he would do that if he wasn't going in hard.
So I don't differ with a lot around the table, but I have a slightly different perspective on it. I think the main point that's been made here that should be noted is the point that you just made, Martha, that Dana made first. Something's not right about Putin here. And if indeed you want to draw the mobster, gangster analogy, normally when the head of a family demonstrates a lack of capacity like that, he or she's taken out. And in our world, it's men that are taken out. So perhaps there's some internal, which I think all of our comments have speculated and implicated that maybe there's not the agreement amongst all of his deputies that he wants. Number two, there's been no nation that has come forward to demonstrate any support for what Putin is doing. There's no question. He thought the way he's handled this and the way he's projected he would handle this would cause some division within NATO. You can listen to any commentator, any general. They all said they've not seen NATO this united. There's no doubt. Listening to him the other day rewrite, revise, and reimagine the end of the Cold War was one of the strangest and most fascinating history lessons that one could ever fictionalize about. And he had even his own, the group that is supposed to be his greatest supporters, there was inertia in that room. So I'm encouraged a little bit by that. It was also interesting to see the Ukrainian prime minister, foreign minister. He doesn't look like a lackey for the United States. He seems credible. He seems honest. He is relentlessly patriotic about being a Ukrainian, and made clear to your points earlier, Jesse, to Secretary Blinken, look, we're with you guys. We hope you act. All of this, the histrionics are great, but let's act. I think it's important that Blinken and the Ukrainian foreign minister continue to do these kind of press conferences. I think it sends a message to Russia, to the world, to Americans alike, who I don't think we're prepared to send troops there. And I also think the audience that's also looking at this is China. China's not said a word about this. In fact, they've said that they respect sovereign boundaries. We'll see where that goes. But to see NATO fortified, strong like this, and to see us standing with Ukraine and the foreign minister there in D.C.
Yeah.
No, but Jesse, there's not been anything. We can say verbal, and we could be critical, and I'm fine with that. But he is unflinching in his support of what we're doing. The Ukrainian foreign minister is, and I think Blinken and the president have made clear we're unflinching in our support of them. I think that's a positive right now.
So what happens if this thing moves into not just Ukraine? What if Vlad goes into Poland? What if he goes into some of the Baltic NATO states? You think Joe Biden's going to trigger Article 5 and send a massive amount of American soldiers into Eastern Europe to
He
defend
probably would.
Estonia?
The evil
You
bastard.
think that could happen?
I actually think he would.
You think he will?
I think attack on one is attack on all, and I think NATO. If there's one thing that's bulletproof about NATO, it's that belief. But I disagree slightly with what Harold said because and you mentioned it. Talk is one thing. You can talk all you want about being united. But when you look at NATO and those NATO countries, you can't gut your military to pay for your welfare state and open up your borders and then believe you can muster the kind of collective will necessary to stare down a maniac who has ambitions
right.
potentially on that continent. What is the 82nd Airborne doing right now in Poland as they prepare? They're setting up processing centers for refugees.
Oh boy.
That's what our soldiers and Border Patrol agents do best these days with invasions. They help facilitate refugees. I don't think that Vladimir Putin believes his adversaries are fundamentally serious right now. He doesn't believe the West is a serious civilization. We're running around talking about genders and reparations and all of this. He sees us divided. He sees us as self-loathing.
Yep.
And as a result, he thinks this is his moment to make an aggressive move, because we may talk about Article 5, and we should, but would the American people truly support sending our boys halfway across the world to fight against Vladimir Putin? I think the elites would want us to do so. The population in America would probably see.
Do you think those oligarchs who have some of that financing coming their way, some of what we're doing, you think they're going to call him? I think they are. Look, we can't have it every which way. And I know that we don't like, some around the table don't like Biden, don't like Democrats, and that's fine. But one thing is clear. He does not have the support, I think, Putin, of everyone he wants in Russia on this. He does not have the oligarchs. And at the end of the day, I agree with you in this regard. We're not going to take him out with our military. It's going to be an internal thing that weakens him. And I think he's weakened by that. Are those troops on those guns? You serve. Can you imagine being in one of those bunkers right now, one of those 190,000 troops in that cold, waiting for them to tell you you're going to go and perhaps kill Russians in Ukraine? I think this is a far more nuanced and complicated thing. And I understand our politics here. But I got to tell you, I'm rooting for the president. I know we all are. But I'm rooting for him in a big way. And I'm rooting for Blinken as well in these.
I just hope like hell that a Republican gets in, namely Donald Trump. Maybe he could stop a lot of this shit.
These conversations and showdowns.
All right. Dana, would you like to say anything before we go to break?
Wrap it up. The other piece of news was that the foreign minister of Russia, Lavrov, was supposed to have a meeting with Blinken on Thursday. That is off because Blinken said he would only meet if there was not an invasion. Now, at 8:30 a.m. this morning, it was only an incursion, but the administration at 9:02 a.m. finally said it was an invasion, so that meeting is off.
Okay. I mean, it is interesting how we've kind of moved the language, Martha. At first, as Dana said, it changed. It got more intense, and then so did the sanctions. Last night, we had a certain set of sanctions just on that eastern region. Then we went a higher step. You heard the foreign minister say he expects a lot more sanctions to keep getting piled on and not give Putin a sense of, okay, this is as far as we're going to go.
Yeah, I think the language of minor incursion that the president used a couple of weeks ago was a big mistake because he lost the ability last night to say that and to allow it to be true, right? So in this essence, last night, once he said that, any invasion had to be called an invasion or he would have looked weak.
Right.
So that got corrected within an hour this morning. That wiggle room was eaten up by dropping that phrase when he did.
Can I ask Martha a question about,
Please.
just thinking about this on my way here, knowing that you would be here today. Because you have such a close relationship with many of the World War II veterans, and you had a chance to interview them. And obviously the Cold War was different than World War II, but it was an outgrowth of it. And you read Gerard Baker today in the Wall Street Journal, who said, we won the Cold War, but we then lost it as the West because we didn't focus. And I wonder if you have any insight as to how people are feeling.
Actually, it's funny because I think about your experience, because it's something that I think a lot of Americans don't think a lot about, and that is the creation of all of those NATO countries after the Cold War, right? After the fall of the Soviet Union, when they were so weak, to then build up that bolster of NATO nations right on their border that really aggravated them, right? So was that the best move at that point? It's almost like post-World War II. How much do you beat up Germany at that point? You want them to become a democracy that can thrive after it's all over. And I think that's something that historically we have to look back at and say, was that a mistake or not, to incorporate all those NATO nations right on their border, right when they were at their weakest?
Do you think there ever will be any accountability? Obviously expanding NATO year after year right to Russia's doorstep, but also making the Ukrainians give their nukes back in the early 90s. Are we ever going to get any accountability for the world community, as the foreign minister said from Ukraine? We said, yes, we'll give these back, but we expect you to get our back if we ever get invaded, and they've been invaded twice.
Yeah.
And we have not, and the world has not supported them the way they believe they would be supported.
Yet another lesson that unilateral disarmament not very effective.
No,
You're surrounded by people who'd like to take your land, and there's a litany of other examples where that's the case that you mentioned.
They would probably like for American troops and troops from all the European countries come in and help them.
In Libya, obviously.
Hopefully that don't happen.
So when you're staring down the barrel, you talk about a guy in a trench, and what are they thinking about? I guess I'd be thinking about, it depends on what trench you're in and what part of Ukraine, because there's a lot of different
The
views
second
of
biggest
Russia.
country on the
It's a
continent.
huge country with a huge amount of resources and a lot of leverage because of where the pipelines currently go. I mean, every other pipeline that Russia supplies fuel to Europe goes through Ukraine or Belarus.
Yep.
And Russia effectively controls Belarus at this point. So Nord Stream 1, which operates right now, is operational, bypasses all of that, and so would Nord Stream 2, which we shut off. I would want to hope that the world's leaders, especially the United States, whether we take military action or not, listen, that when an ambitious man says he's going to do something, that we take it seriously. It may sound like the musings of someone who wants to reestablish Russia, but he is 73 years old. What is his mental state? I don't know, but I know he admires Vladimir Lenin. I know he admires the legacy of the Soviet Union and would like to see himself on that same pedestal, and will go as far as he needs to make that happen.
I would maybe mention one thing about NATO, to something that I learned over the years of being there, which is that in history, it shows that democracies usually don't declare war on each other. And there's a desire from people who are born free. Like, if we all believe that you are born with the inherent belief that you are free individuals, then you want to have self-determination. So that's why there was all this fight against communism and socialism, because these countries recognize that the path to making sure that their citizens have opportunities and freedom and free will, that was through democracies. And so NATO would provide you that protection. So that's why there was the push. And I think I admire countries that really wanted to join NATO because they wanted to be a part of it. Why did Ukraine want so badly to be a part of it? One, they want their own self-determination. It's a young country now. A lot of the people that live there did not live under Russian rule. Mm-hmm. They don't remember that. They don't want to go back to that necessarily. And that's why you see the attempts to fight. I didn't hear a lot of talk today in all the words that were spoken, the word freedom. I mean, is that what we're talking about here? And to me, it makes a really big difference. Now, it doesn't mean that your fights are fought for you by other people necessarily, but can you be a part of the free world? In my opinion, I think we should fight for that in whatever ways we can. The one thing we have not mentioned, and this is a concern, and I think the Biden administration is doing pretty well on this so far, hopefully, which is Putin's capabilities of wreaking havoc on the world in regards to cyber attacks. So our water supply, and that of Ukraine and the Europeans, your energy supply, your food supply, your ability to do banking transactions, your ability to Google whatever you want, that is on the line here.
Well, that goes to your point about the freedom argument. Has the president looked the American people, Harold Ford Jr., directly in the eye and said, this is what we're doing in Eastern Europe, this is why we're doing it, and this is what could happen because we're doing it? He kind of flirted with it with the gas prices and says, oh, I have a plan. Well, he said he's had a plan before. and he didn't have a plan, or the plan didn't work. So I don't know if we trust that. But you add cyber to that. You saw the market down like 600 points earlier this afternoon. If you have a couple months of a market like that and gas goes to $4 and maybe they hit what they hit Colonial last time, we could go a tit for tat with cyber and sanctions. You're coming out of a pandemic where people are just getting their head above water. I don't know if this country is ready mentally, financially for something like that. Are we ready?
I hope so. Look, you don't get an opportunity to, during the lead up to war, to really prepare as much as you want. I think Don Rumsfeld got criticized for saying you go to war with the armor you have, not the armor you want.
But it's also true.
It's true. There's knowns, there's unknowns, and there's unknown unknowns. Right.
So, you know, the administration, to their credit, have tried to warn big companies and small companies alike about how not to defend against a cyber attack, but what's your continuity plan? We should anticipate we're going to have some reaction from this, and they should understand that we will be offensive as well, and I think the president's made clear. I agree with Dana on this NATO thing. I hope, I mean, there's a whole history behind this, and we can, perhaps the giving up of the weapons of Ukraine may be something we should look back at, but in terms of joining NATO, I'm glad all of those nations did, and I think President Reagan had it best when he said there is no security or no safety in the appeasement of evil. And I think this president, our president, is doing everything he possibly can, short of sending troops. And I think Pete has a greater perspective on this than I do, and perhaps most around the table. But this president, I think, is using every tool and playing every card. It was not a great hand, but I think he's playing it as well as he possibly can.
I think that we should mention President Trump and NATO, actually, because even though he was criticized for saying, "Oh, NATO is weak," kind of poking at NATO, but what he did is he made NATO sit up and take notice, and a lot of those countries did start to pay more of their contributions into NATO. And I understand that the Biden administration wants to say that NATO has never been more united. Again, I don't know of that because of the energy issue. But President Trump, I think, deserves a lot of credit for making sure that NATO was, one, on the radar, but that also that everyone that was in NATO was put on notice that if you want to be a part of this, if it's all for one and one for all, then that means that you have to be fulfilling your commitments. President Trump made that happen.
And he put Germany on notice, too. He said, you're getting all your energy from Russia, and we're paying to defend you from Russia. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Martha, here's the president today talking about what he's doing in terms of deployments strategically and defensively with some of our NATO allies. Watch.
Today, in response to Russia's admission that it will not withdraw its forces from Belarus, I have authorized additional movements of U.S. forces and equipment already stationed in Europe to strengthen our Baltic allies, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania.
We're headed right into it.
Let me be clear. These are totally defensive moves on our part. We have no intention of fighting Russia. We want to send an unmistakable message, though, that the United States, together with our allies, will defend every inch of NATO territory and abide by the commitments we made into NATO.
So, Martha, when he says that, is he saying that for domestic consumption? Like, I'm not going to drag us into a war? Or is he telling Putin, listen, we're not trying to start a war in Eastern Europe? Who is he talking to?
Well, I think that, echoes of Afghanistan are still ringing in his ears. He just pulled out of one war. He doesn't want to look at the American people and say, I might be bringing you into another. But there's only one reason to ramp up your presence in the NATO countries, and that's if you think that there's a chance that Putin might actually go into one of them.
That's right.
And so at that point, given everything that we've said here about NATO and Article 5, that's the moment when the president needs to say, make no mistake, we are ironclad on Article 5. Don't even think about an encroachment in any of these countries, right? I mean, that would be the moment when you would, if you are, ascribing to Article 5, then that's when you have to stand up and say.
And I think that's what he said, though. I think
he's trying to spepe to Putin, but the only message Putin's going to get is he's going to use it as a rationale to go further. Look, the NATO countries are surrounding me. They're going on the offensive. They'll use it for internal propaganda.
Right.
But he's clearly saying we're not going boots on the ground in Ukraine, and we're completely defensive. There's going to be no offense in these countries.
I mean, it's amazing to me that an American president says, we are just purely defensive here. I'm like, why is that? I don't understand why we waited on the sanctions. I feel like I understand that you thought it would be a deterrent against it, but he'd already escalated so much he should have been sanctioned earlier.
Yeah, and that's what the Ukrainian foreign minister said right there, too. All right, we're going to monitor this breaking news out of Ukraine and keep you posted.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.
Okay, that's it for this one. I know I didn't comment or react too much, but I didn't want to interrupt you all watching the show. I might do one more video today, and then maybe more than one, I don't know. But love you guys. Peace out.